We are continuing this week in Genesis 41, Pharaoh's dreams. If you remember last time we were together last week in Genesis 40, Joseph was put into the prison with the two officials, high royal officials, and they had dreams, and Joseph was able to interpret them. And at the end of the time, the cupbearer was restored to his high position with the king, and the baker was not. The baker was executed, as Joseph had predicted from the dreams, or interpreted from the dreams. And so he said, "Remember me to Pharaoh." And the cupbearer went back to his duties and completely forgot about Joseph for the moment. Now, the key verse in this chapter 41, it reveals the main purpose of the chapter, and that is 41:32. And it says the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice. And there's a theme there with that twice. We'll look at that in just a second. Because the thing is established by God. And you know, underlying everything that we've talked about in the book of Genesis is that the thing is established by God. Everything that happens inside of God's great will, his great will. That doesn't mean that God is thrilled with everything that happens. And we got to make a distinction now. God does not wish for anybody to sin ever. God does not cause anybody to sin ever. So in his immediate will for us, he wants us to live lives in which we know the difference between good and bad. And that's what we see in Joseph. Joseph is a man that recognizes the difference between good and bad, and he seeks to do good. God will surely bring it to pass. What God has decided to do, that will happen. I've said it to you many times before. You may not remember, but I say there's one sure way to know that your prayer will always be answered. You know what that is? Pray for God's will to be done. And that's a little bit, you know, that may seem facetious at first, but it's really not. Well, when we go through the process of sanctification, when we work at making righteous decisions, when we work at being like Jesus, and over time, God begins to mold us to be more like Jesus, what we're doing is conforming our decisions to decisions that God would make. To use Joseph as an example, we're not only acting once God whispers in our ear, do this good thing. We seek to be like Joseph and be a wise man, wise people, to where we wisely choose to do righteous things of our own will. We are conforming our will to God's. We're becoming like Jesus daily, and we see that in Joseph's example. The theme of twos, and this list is not all of the twos, but there are two officials in chapter 40, verse 2. The dreams, every dream in chapter 40 and in chapter 41 is repeated twice. One time, usually the first time by the author, and then later Joseph will repeat it or someone else will repeat it. After 2 years, this chapter 41 starts. The king had two dreams in verse 5 of chapter 41. And all this theme is showing, like we have talked about other little themes, showing that human events are the result of divine will, that God is working. Whether we recognize him or not, whether we actively seek his will or not, God's will is happening. We start out in verse 1 of chapter 41. Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years. So we estimated that Joseph could have been in prison for as many as 13 years. I guess more appropriately, it would have been he had been in at least 11 years in prison, or possibly up to 11 years. I guess it would have been, because he was 17 at the beginning when he was taken into slavery. and we'll see here in a minute that he's 30. So 13 years have elapsed since he was thrown in the pit. 2 years after, after the events with the two court officials, the Pharaoh had a dream, and behold, he stood by a river. Suddenly there came up out of the river 7 cows, fine looking and fat, and fed in the meadow. Very healthy, both a sign of wealth, prosperity, and we're going to be eaten for a while. There's good cows. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt. That word ugly there is ra in Hebrew. And ra is evil, bad and evil. They came up evil looking and gaunt, and stood with the other cows on the bank of the river. And the ra, the ugly and the gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine looking and fat cows. So Pharaoh awoke. He slept and dreamed a second time, again the twos. Suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. And this word good here is tov, the Hebrew word tov. And so we see within, kind of embedded in this story, good and evil. Good and evil. And so how will Joseph negotiate the good and the evil? Life is filled with good and evil. Then behold, 7 thin heads of grain, blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump heads, and plump and full heads. So Pharaoh awoke, and indeed it was a dream. Now it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and he called for all the magicians of Egypt. They probably were also called the wise men of Egypt. When we get to the New Testament, the wise men were likely court magicians. There also were offices of prophets, and these magicians were relied on by the kings in the ancient world to tell them what was going to happen. The people believed, especially for Pharaoh, but it was true of all kings, that kings were placed by God on earth to rule. And therefore, they called Pharaoh the Son of God, that he was a God, and he was placed there by God, that he was divine. And so he surrounded himself with these court magicians who were going to tell him how to interpret life, interpret dreams, what was going to happen next, so that he could make decisions. He called for all the magicians of Egypt and its wise men. And we could put that in quotations, the wise men, to be contrasted with Joseph. Are these truly wise men in the way that Joseph was called a wise man? Let's read on and see if we see. And Pharaoh told them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret for them or interpret the dreams for Pharaoh. And so immediately we kind of think forward to what's going to happen later on in the Pentateuch to like Moses. Moses comes and he sets himself as a prophet of God against the court prophets, magicians, and wise men in Pharaoh's court. So they were unable to do it. Now the cupbearer at this point says, wait a minute. I met somebody when I was in jail that could interpret dreams. What was his name? Then the chief butler spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I remember my faults this day. I remember that I was supposed to tell you something and I forgot. When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me in custody in the house of the captain of the guard. I like the way he put that. Everybody else said he was thrown in jail. But he said, when I was put in custody of the captain of the guard, both me and the chief baker We each had a dream one night, he and I, two dreams. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Now there was a young Hebrew man with us there, a servant of the captain of the guard, and we told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each man he interpreted according to his own dream, and it came to pass just as he interpreted for us. What is the difference between the wise men of Egypt and the wise man Joseph? Well, you and I know. They knew that Joseph got it right. But why did he interpret his dreams correctly, or their dreams correctly, and the wise men of Egypt could not? Because God was with him. Joseph was smart. Joseph had abilities. I would say, based on what we've heard, Joseph didn't have a bunch of sin habits. You know, sin habits fog your brain, no matter what they are. Because what sin is doing, what sin is when we elevate something created, like we are created. We were created. We are creatures, which means we were created. And they began to value things which were created above the Creator. So, good-looking women, fast cars, popularity, things that people still value. Well, when you begin, your mind was created to focus on those things? No. Our brain was not made to enjoy a video game over the rest of the life, or alcohol, or smoking drugs, or whatever. Our mind was created to know God and to value Him. John?
He says that same thing in Romans chapter 1. People serve the creation more than the Creator.
Right. That's what sin is. It's when we begin to value something that God made for us, made with us, above the Creator. I used this analogy Saturday in my sermon in California. It is like your most beloved person, or it's like you paint a picture for your most beloved person, or you do a sculpture for your most beloved person, and it's wonderful. And you give it to them, and they love it. In fact, they love it so much that they begin to love it and forget about you. Now, how would that make you feel? I love this picture, but I can take you or leave you. And that's how God feels, I think, sometimes. It's far be it from me to project feelings onto God. But the idea is, Joseph's mind wasn't cluttered because he didn't have a lot of sin habits. And he intentionally was focused, I think, on God, and God helped use his natural gifts to correctly interpret these dreams. Those Egyptian pharaohs, what did they worship? Well, because he was life or death to them, they worshiped that Pharaoh liking what they said. And so they were trying to second guess another human being, which is impossible. We don't even know what we think really well. How can we know what somebody else is thinking? And if you spend all your time and energy trying to please another person, you're going to be full of nonsense. And so God worked him, and I'm saying it that way. I do believe that God gave him the correct interpretation, but I don't think in the same way it would call him a prophet if God spoke to him with the interpretation. It calls him a wise man. So he used the gifts that God gave him in an uncluttered mind to give a correct interpretation. I think. And I say it that way because that's the way I read the text. He is a wise man. And they are not. They are unwise. The Egyptian wise men are unwise men. So it happened. Just as he interpreted, so it happened. He restored me to my office, and he hanged him, or he predicted that he would be hanged by Pharaoh, the baker. Even the timing here, the author is telling this story in a way that you see that even the timing of the cupbearer remembering came at the exact moment when it was most effective. Joseph had asked him 2 years earlier, remember me to Pharaoh. What if the cupbearer had run and said, I met a guy named Joseph. Boy, he was a wise man, could interpret dreams. Pharaoh would say, well, that's very nice. And Pharaoh may or may not have remembered here. Cupbearer forgot until he heard about a dream. And even the timing here is just at the right time. People say, God is always on time. He's never early, never late, always on time. Verse 14, then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon, and he shaved, and he changed his clothing, put on deodorant, I'm sure, came to Pharaoh. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I've had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. But I've heard it said of you that you can understand a dream and interpret it. So Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, it is not me. God will give Pharaoh the answer of peace. Okay? Right there is why Joseph's mind's clear. Was Joseph? What were the Egyptians, wise men, focused on? The attention of the Pharaoh, pleasing the Pharaoh. What is and getting status themselves. They're focused on themselves. They're focused on Pharaoh. No wonder they have no idea what's happening. But Joseph says, it's not me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of his peace. I am a vehicle. I am an instrument in God's hand. When you hear beautiful music coming out of me, this is what Joseph would say. It's not something great about me. It is that God is using me as an instrument and playing beautiful music to the world. Isn't that a nice way to think about it? That's hard. And notice as we focus on the created rather than the creator, that often, maybe most often, includes ourselves. You know, we want status for ourselves. We want attention for ourselves. We have this temptation when we hear people say stuff that sounds good, we want to agree with them because we want to be right rather than we want to be righteous. Rather than wanting God's righteousness on us, we want to be right. But Joseph gives attention to the Lord. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, behold, in my dream I stood on the bank of the river. And note this is the second time that this story is repeated. The theme of twos. Suddenly 7 cows came up out of the river, fine looking and fat. They fed in the meadow. Then behold, 7 other cows came up, poor and very ugly and gaunt, such ugliness as I have never seen in the land of Egypt. That is, such evil in Hebrew, such raw as I've never seen in the land of Egypt. And the gaunt and ugly cows ate up the first 7 cows, the fat cows. When they had eaten them up, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were just as evil, just as ugly as at the beginning. So I awoke. Joseph, the wise man, could discern between good and evil. And I think it is embedded and it is wordplay within the structure of the story. But I think very much the idea here is a wise man can look and discern what is good and what is evil. I believe the more we are grown in our faith, the more we are seeking God's will in our life, the more when we hear a lie, we recognize that that's a lie. That's not true. And when we see behavior that is evil, and everybody's saying, well, this is good, this is okay, this is normal, everybody does this. We say, no, that's evil. And when we see good, we're able to say, well, that's good. Even if the news media is not applauding it and saying it's good, we can say that's good. That's what a wise man. And I think it is a huge idea in the text that we're to be wise men like Joseph, and that we are to call good good and we are to call evil evil. And I think that is in there. And he sees it, he is a wise man, not because he is inherently wise. His IQ may or may not be any higher than all the Egyptian magicians. They might be more talented and smarter than Joseph, but it is because he seeks God and God is with him that he is a wise man. And we cannot necessarily make our IQ higher. We can't run faster. We can't be taller, whatever we may want. But we can seek God. Every person can seek God. And in order to please God, be excellent. Be the best you that you are, that you can be. We don't need to try it. We don't need to get an ideal image and try to be like that other than Jesus, a spiritual image. We need to be us, the best we can be for God, and invite God in to our life rather than shut him out. Also, I saw in my dream, and suddenly seven heads came up of one stalk of wheat, which good and full. Then behold, 7 heads withered, thin, and blighted by the east wind sprang up after them, and the thin heads devoured the 7 good heads. So I told this to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. They are the same. They're saying the same thing. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years. The 7 good heads are 7 years. The dreams are the same. The dreams are one. And the 7 thin and ugly cows, the evil cows, which came up after them are 7 years. The 7 empty heads, blighted by the east wind, are 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. He has worked through me as an instrument to tell you what is about to happen, what his will is. Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt. But after them, 7 years of famine will arise, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt. The famine will deplete the land. There'll be nothing. So plenty will not be known in the land because of the famine following, for it will be very severe. The dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. There's our main theme, that God is sovereign over creation, and that because it's told twice, it's going to happen. That's for emphasis. That's for repeating. Note, I want to make the point again too. As we've been going through Genesis, we've been over a year now working through it. Has food ever been used to teach us about anything in the book of Genesis? Eating food. That's a repeated theme, isn't it? I would say maybe a motif because it kind of changes in the thing. But all the way back to the Garden of Eden, it was a hunger was used to illustrate our sinfulness or our desires. Now, we were programmed to be hungry. We were made with hunger. And it is when our desires, when our hungers become more important than God who created us, it's a problem. And so yet here again, we have that same metaphor, if you will, of hunger and famine, blessing, plenty to eat. And what are the people going to do when there's 7 years of food, prosperity, plenty? Are they going to be making plans for the future? Well, apparently not. Apparently they eat it up just as quick as it goes, and maybe throw away what's not left. And when the trouble comes, people are in trouble. I would say there's definitely a spiritual lesson in that. If when times are good, that is when you should work at your spiritual life. Because trouble's coming. We all know it. We're all going to hit seasons where we do not have time to read our Bible, where beloved people are struck sick and die, and tragedy happens. And I'll tell you what, that drains that tank that we need. We need to grow our faith. We need that. We need energy to grow our tank. And when we feel bad, it's awful hard to grow spiritually. And so, do not wait until bad things happen to build your faith in God. I think that's especially as we go through Genesis and they use hunger as a metaphor to talk about spiritual matters. You know, Esau didn't save. Esau was starving. He traded his birthright right there. Boom, it was gone. Over and over, Isaac is going to try to give the blessing to the son he knows is the wrong son because he's hungry. But before I do, let me eat a bowl of stew because I'm hungry. And so do not wait till the famine happens to begin to grow spiritually. Faye, did you have something?
Well, it's probably changing the subject, but it just come in my mind.
Okay.
I heard this Israelite general, more general, say during the 6 Day War, the Israelites had to go through this wide area of the desert in order to get to the enemy's supply of ammunition to destroy it. And they figured that they would lose 50% of their tanks because the enemy had planted landmines all over that area of the desert.
Yes.
He said right before they started, there was this terrible windstorm. He said you couldn't see in front of you. He said it lasted about 20 minutes. And when the wind died down, you could see every one of those landmines sticking up out of the ground.
And they went right through them.
They went right through them.
Yeah. I'll tell you, if you need something tangible, more tangible to believe in God, you need to read about the last 100 years with the Israelites returning. I mean, to me, it is very apparent.
God takes care of his people. He's still taking care of his people.
That even in their unrepentance, I believe that the nation of Israel is a secular nation, and it is not a repentant people by and large. There are repentant people there, but I think by and large Israel has rejected the Messiah, and nevertheless God had promised to be with those people until and return them to the land. And I'll tell you, the 6 Day War, 73 War, 49 War, what was it, 54 War. It's unbelievable. And for people to be able to dismiss that shows me a tremendously hard heart. I mean, there is no way the nation of Israel should exist. And God has been with them. And so if you have trouble believing what the Bible says, I just go back and read. And that's not the only time something we might say spooky happened in those wars that preserved Israel as a nation. John?
Most of you know I've been a nurse about 47 years, and actually, in the first 25 of that was an ER, or 20, whatever. And I've seen unbelievable stuff. There was this guy one time that was at work, and his wife was taking the kids to school, and she turned into the school, turned left, and she turned in front of a dump truck. It was a dump truck, like a semi, big long thing, that killed her and all of his kids, you know. And there were other instances where people were, you know, doing something and the entire families were killed in wrecks or fires or something. You know. So you just never know. You know, it's a split second. You can lose everything.
Everything, yes. Yes. That's absolutely true. And so now is the time to get things. And so I can't help but pull that out here. That it's that same metaphor over and over, and I think of our hungers and not waiting. So let's keep moving here. Verse 33. Now therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. So not only is Joseph interpreting the dream with the help of God, now he gives him advice. And he says, let Pharaoh pick a wise man to manage those 7 years of prosperity and to save grain. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years. Let them gather all the food for those good years that are coming, and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities, in storehouses. Then that food shall be as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land may not perish during the famine. Now, one of the commentators that I was reading said that this next section, as Joseph rises to power and administrates things, that there's a lot of little clues that he is like a second Adam, like Adam, and the blessings and abilities that God gave to Adam. And we're especially focusing back on the blessing in Genesis 1:28, be fruitful and multiply, spread out, fill the land, have dominion over the birds of the sky and the fish in the sea, and so forth. So we'll see. I'm not 100% convinced of that, except that I do think that, well, let's go through and see what we think about that. Verse 37, so the advice was good. Tov, again, Ra versus Tov, the tree of Ra and Tov, good and evil. So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and as wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all the people shall be ruled according to your word. Now remember, Joseph got up this morning, and he was a servant of the captain of the guard in his prison. And now all of a sudden, he has become the second most powerful man in the world. Pharaoh was a great empire. Egypt was a great empire at that time. You shall be over my house, and all the people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. I have the trump card. I'm not letting go of that. I am the boss. But you run things, Joseph. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand. And he clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried out before him, bow the knee. So he set him over all the land of Egypt. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no man may lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. He made him the ruler of Egypt, over Egypt. And again, this reminds us of the original blessing. And throughout the book of Genesis, we had the original blessing, have dominion over the land. We have seen God renew the blessing with the different patriarchs. And here we see a physical manifestation of that blessing, ruling over all the land. And it reminded me of a scripture in Psalm chapter 8. And this sounds like Joseph exhibits the qualities of the original blessings to rule over the land. That is Psalm 8, verses 5 and 6. Talking about mankind, you have made them only a little lower than God and crowned them with glory and honor. You gave them charge of everything you made, putting all things under their authorities. So that is the psalmist there, the poet, the singer, is singing about that original blessing. And Joseph manifests that. You have crowned them with glory and honor. He has put the signet ring on our hands and on Joseph's hand there to rule the land. Going on to verse 45, Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath Paneah, I guess. He gave him as a wife Asenath, the daughter of Poti-Pherah, priest of On. So a very important and high status marriage. And again, like he made Adam ruler over, have dominion over the land, he gave Joseph, likewise he gave Joseph a wife. He gave Adam a wife, and he gives Joseph a wife. So Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, which is fairly young to have this much power. Generally, the older men ruled in ancient times. Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went through all the land of Egypt. Now in the 7 plentiful years, the ground brought forth abundantly, just as Joseph had predicted. So he gathered up all the food of the 7 years, which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities. He laid up in every city the food of the fields which surrounded them. Joseph gathered very much grain, as the sand of the sea, until he stopped counting, for it was immeasurable. And to Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of famine came, whom Asenath, the daughter of Poti-Pherah, the priest of On, bore to him. And we'll meet those later. Well, I guess we meet them here. That's right. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God has made me forget my toil in all my father's house. And the name of the second was called Ephraim, for God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. Then the 7 years of plenty, which were in the land of Egypt, ended. And the 7 years of famine began to come, as Joseph had said. The famine was in all the lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread, because they had saved. Verse 55, so when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Then Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, go to Joseph, whatever he says to you, do. The famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, and the famine became severe in the land of Egypt. So all the countries came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain, because the famine was severe in all the lands. So what do you think is going to happen next? Well, I guess his brothers who threw him in a pit are going to get hungry up in the promised land, aren't they? And so we'll see in the next chapter, the rest of the family comes down to see Joseph, because they hear that there is still grain in Egypt. So as we reflect on this chapter, Joseph, again, is portrayed as the ideal man. And he exhibits the qualities of what an ideal king should be. In that way, he is a character, he is a person who anticipates one who is yet to come in the distant future. Joseph is not the answer. Joseph does save the Israelites in the short run. Because they're hungry. They need food, and he gives them food. But in the process, just like Esau sold his birthright for a bowl of stew, the Israelites are going to sell their birthright, their freedom, to Joseph for a bowl of stew too. So this is very fascinating to me. I mean, I very much believe that this is, it was God's will. Everything that happens is God's will. But I also see connection in the life of Joseph. He's a complex character only in that in the next chapter, everybody, the Egyptians and the Israelites, sell themselves into slavery for food. And it's no different than what the woman did with the fruit, the woman and the man did in the garden. It's no different than what Esau did. Still, in his wisdom and discerning of good and evil and his ability to anticipate dreams, he is anticipating the ideal man to come. So it's very interesting to me. So even though Joseph's line is not the promised seed, I think in many ways his life points towards the Messiah's. All right? And so we are to try to draw lessons from the life of Joseph and see the wisdom and to seek to be wise men and women like he was. Any thoughts or questions about that? I kind of threw a little controversy there at the end. I think Joseph is not the answer because we can't be, by being good, we can't be good enough to get ourselves into heaven. And it's not insinuating that, but I would say once we have given our life to Jesus, we are to try to live wisely like Joseph did. Okay?
I was thinking about these devotional books. Now I've got several of them, and I love them.
Uh-huh.
Because they always leave you with a good feeling, like Jesus loves you and he'll never leave you or forsake you. And that'll start your day off feeling good.
That's good.
But when you read the Bible, and you start in the book of Genesis, and you read till you get tired of reading,
yeah,
it don't always leave you feeling good.
No, and I've said this many times, and it's such a wonderful point, Faye. Jesus did not come to make us feel good. He did not die to make us feel good. I think almost the opposite. He died so that when we feel bad and we recognize we feel bad, the base, at the core, every bad feeling comes because we're separated from God. That's what we were created for. And so anything we feel bad about is just an extension of our separation. That's the spiritual truth. And that is the truth that, by and large, the world refuses. But we feel bad because we were made to walk with God, and we don't. And so Jesus can't help us until we recognize that. It is our sin that separates us from God. And I think the Bible reflects that. And so I think it is good to have a devotion. I mean, the world, there's so much hardship. It is good to have an encouragement. His mercies are new every morning. We have to balance that, don't we? And that's why I always say we were not made for extreme in emotions. We were made to be even keeled in our emotions. And that's why I like the word joy. Joy is, I believe, is a contentment, a flat line. We feel joy when good happens to us, and we feel joy when bad happens, when we endure bad. We know that God is with us. And we stay basically even keel, the same. I don't think we're supposed to be too happy and too joyous or to seek happiness. That's like a drug. And I don't think we're supposed to be depressed. And I think flip-flopping emotions is a symptom of a sinful world. I think that's why people want to go to the bar on Friday night. I think that's why people want to drink alcohol and party and things to make the pain go away. They're trying to get away from the lows. I don't think we're supposed to be too high either. I think we're supposed to be even keel and stay the same about things. But it's hard. It's hard because life is hard and life beats us down. And so we want to overcompensate with fun. What else, John?
You know the saying about breaking the word of joy down, right?
I'm not sure I do.
You have true joy is the acronym, the letters Jesus, others, and yourself. Put Jesus first and others and then yourself.
Right.
Joy, J-O-Y, gives you
Okay.
true joy.
Jesus, others, and stuff, and that is a good thing. I definitely think that joy, that contentment, for biblical joy, contentment is a better equivalent than happiness. Jesus did not die to make us feel happy, and that's the lie of the prosperity gospel preachers. They want to lie to you and tell you that Jesus died so that you can be happy, and that's not true. If people that are too happy don't have any need for Jesus. People that don't have to worry about where the next dollar comes, they feel good about things. And they don't, blessed are the poor in spirit. If you don't ever feel any sadness or depression, you don't ever turn to God. You know that popularity, success, good looks, intelligence, all these things that we think are wonderful qualities, breed arrogance. If you have something that sets you above other people, it is a lot harder. It is a lot harder to realize that your sin separates you from God and your only hope is Jesus. And so it's a disservice to have too much positive in your life. We need to be even keeled. It's okay to have, and I'm not condemning anything really. Too much of anything will make you arrogant. Too much of a good thing will make you arrogant. And so we need to be humble people, even keel. I think so. What else, John? Have you found something else?
Well, I can't find the verse, but Proverbs talks about riches would not profit in the day of wrath.
That's right. That's right. Nothing from this world that makes us feel good will we take with us to Judgment Day. And there'll be, in fact, too much good, too much wealth, too much popularity, all those things. Those are things that we want to attribute to God, not to ourselves. Those are stumbling blocks. We have too much good things, then we don't feel that we need Jesus. I know that's true of me. I realized a long time ago, when it comes to finances, what I really want is for God to bless me with enough money so that I never have to trust Him for money ever again. That's my goal. So I don't need God when it comes to financial things. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? That's a very bad. Praise God, He has not given me my goal, my financial goal. When you have to rely on God every month to pay bills, you know where you stand with God. It's ever present. I can only assume that people that don't ever have to worry about money, they don't have that same blessing of remembering God and crying out to God on financial matters.
We pay the 10% first. Mm-hmm. When we get our check, if we pay the first 10% to God, He blesses the other 90%.
I have found that to be true in my life.
It's true in mine.
I have found that to be true in my life. When I give selflessly, it seems like the finances are easier. But when I try to keep for myself, then it's struggle. I always say paying bills is like swimming in a piranha-filled river. But every month there's a couple sharks swimming in there too to take the big bite. And when I try to deny God, and same thing if I withhold love for people that need, because I'm worried about not having enough, it seems like I never have enough. And so I try to remember to give in God's name when I get opportunities and not It's an idolatry. You know, wanting to save money can be an idolatry too. And so we're so sinful. We sin going and coming. If God is not, if there's anything that is more important to us, even for a second, than Jesus and His will, then we fall into sin. John?
Proverbs. I read, you know, it's a good idea for everybody to read Proverbs every day, because there's 31 chapters of Proverbs, 31 chapters a month, days in a month. So whatever day it is, you read Proverbs.
What about February?
40 years. Anyway, what you're talking about, in Proverbs 30, it's verses 8 and the end of 8 and beginning of 9, it says, "Give me neither poverty nor riches, feed me with food convenient for me, lest I be full and deny thee, and say, Who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal, and take the name of my God in vain."
Right there. That's it, isn't it? Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive others. Yeah.
But Faye's right. You can't outgive God. If you give him his 10%, and a lot of people go over 10%.
Yeah.
You know, again, Proverbs says, no, Psalms, I think it's 37, 24, or 25, it says, "I've been young, I'm now old, I've never seen the righteous hungry, or a seed begging for bread."
Yeah. That's right. All right. Well, that's good stuff. Let's close there this week and say us a prayer, and we'll come back and we'll see what more we can get from Genesis next week.